Director of the Latin American Program, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this center-wide event organized by the Latin American Program, the Asia Program, the Mexico Institute, and the Canada Institute. Tomorrow, as you know, in Santiago, Chile, representatives of 11 countries of Asia and the Americas will meet to sign the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Once it is ratified by the member states, the CPTPP will create a massive free trade bloc that connects something like 500 million people and economies with a combined GDP of over $10 trillion. The signatories include Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Notably absent from that list, of course, is the United States. During the U.S. presidential campaign in 2016, both candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, announced their opposition to TPP, whose signing in 2015 was seen as a major triumph of the Obama administration. Then President Trump formally withdrew from the agreement on his first full day in office in January of 2017. As we have seen in subsequent months, and especially over the last few days, the withdrawal from TPP has been merely the opening salvo in an effort to rethink, push back, whatever verb you want to use, against existing multilateral trade agreements, particularly NAFTA, and now potentially to erect additional trade barriers. As tomorrow's ceremony in Santiago demonstrates, however, many Pacific Rim countries see benefits in the deeper integration of their economies. We are joined today by distinguished diplomats and experts from Canada, Chile, Japan, Mexico, Singapore, and the United States to reflect on the impact of the CPTPP on their economies and the significance of this new agreement for the future of world trade. Before turning the microphone over to my friend and colleague from the Asia Program, Senior Associate Shioko Goto, I would like to underscore that today's event is the result of a significant team effort which builds on a core strength of the Wilson Center, which is the breadth and depth of its regional programming. In recent months, the Mexico and Canada Institutes, for example, have done extensive work on the renegotiation of NAFTA. So for today's events, my special thanks go to Chris Wilson, Ben Proctor, Anders Beal, Benjamin Gadan, Jacqueline Dolezal, and Kent Hughes, who are not represented in one way or another on today's panels, but have played critical roles behind the scenes. Thanks as well to interns of all of those programs whose names are too numerous to mention. So without further ado, Shioko.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you all very much for joining us here today. I think a year ago, we would have not expected 11 out of the 12 TPP member countries to come together as far as they have today. And the 11 countries have clearly demonstrated an appetite for multilateral trade agreements and more broadly for free and open markets. They share a commitment to a collective approach to further common interests and to address issues of mutual concerns. And this comes at a time of increased concerns about the downside risks of closer market integration and the ability to remain competitive in a global economy. And we can, of course, argue that trade deals per se are at the root cause of jobs lost or concerns and worries about the future of work. But we should also bear in mind that those concerns are very real, and they're not going to go away anytime soon. So perhaps at first blush, we can say that this current situation that we find ourselves is a conflict between those who are for globalization and those who are perhaps on the wing of deglobalization. There are, of course, many, many issues to discuss, not just here in Washington and what the Trump administration may or may not be doing, But the focus of this particular panel, this first panel, will be to spotlight the four major countries that will be at the table at tomorrow's meeting in Chile to sign the CPTPP. I have asked the four discussants today to highlight the journey of their respective countries to the finish line for the CPTPP signing tomorrow, and also discuss that tomorrow is actually not the end, but also the beginning of a new approach for countries to work closely together between themselves and also to expand their cooperative efforts. And finally, I hope they will also address what the expectations are for the CPTPP moving forward. I'd like to briefly introduce our august speakers in the order that I have asked them to speak. First is the Ambassador to Singapore, the Honorable Ashok Kumar Mirpuri. He is the Singaporean ambassador to the United States. And before his appointment, he was ambassador to Indonesia, and he was also High Commissioner to Malaysia and High Commissioner to Australia. His accolades are numerous. He is an immense power broker in Washington as well, and we're very delighted to have him here. Following his comments will be Minister Kazutoshi Aikawa. He is the Deputy Chief of Mission of the Japanese Embassy here in Washington. Before being appointed here, he served as Director General of the Disarmament, Non-Proliferation, and Science Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. His previous positions included Counselor of the Cabinet Secretariat and Deputy Director General at the Economic Affairs Bureau and Latin American and Caribbean Affairs Bureau. And the list actually goes on. But let me move on to our third speaker, who is Kirsten Hillman, who is Canada's Deputy Ambassador to the United States and has actually served as Canada's Chief Negotiator to the TPP. Previously, she was the Assistant Deputy Minister of Trade Agreements and Negotiations branch at the Global Affairs Canada. And finally, but certainly not least, is Alberto Hart, who is the head of the Economic and Environment Department of the Embassy of Peru in the United States, and he is in charge in following up the implementation of the Peru-U.S. Trade Promotion Agreement in force since February 2009. So with that, Ambassador Mirpuri.
Thank you, and thank you for calling me a power broker, maybe a bit too generous in Washington, D.C. I've been here for about almost 6 years, and the first 4 years was spent promoting the TPP, and nobody was interested. And the last 1.5 years have been talking about TPP without the US, and everyone's suddenly interested. I wish there was more interest in the TPP when actually trying to push it through, because at that time there was so much misunderstanding, misapprehension, and we were just working hard to negotiate it. But in coming back, and Shikoko wanted me to look back a little bit of how we've come up to this journey. Singapore has over 21 FTAs, and each FTA builds on each other. So when you ask what's going to happen next, we will use CPTPP or TPP-11, I will use both interchangeably, to build on further bringing the Asia-Pacific together as this free trade area of the Asia-Pacific. But for us, very much that journey started early in the 2000s, and one key partner for us was a bilateral FTA that we did with the US. This was the first bilateral FTA that the United States did with any Asian country. And we started that in the year 2000. Actually, 1999 was when President Clinton and my then Prime Minister Goh Chok Tong agreed to proceed with the agreement. It built on the very strong relationship that Singapore and the US already have in security ties, in economic ties, and the feeling was that we wanted to strengthen this with a bilateral FTA. Singapore is the US largest trading partner in Southeast Asia, is the largest destination for investments in the Asia-Pacific, and today trade between our two countries is almost $70 billion. For the current administration, it's a happy kind of trade because the US has a surplus. both in trade in goods and trade in services. But that's not the important part of it. I think the important part has been pulling us together as a very significant cornerstone in building that economic relationship for the future. Since we've had this US-Singapore FTA, bilateral trade has grown up by more than 70% in about a decade. And the US-Singapore FTA, Free Trade Agreement, was not just about trade. And I think that's important also as we look at the TPP, the TPP-11. It was also about financial market access, it was intellectual property rights, e-commerce, professionals licensing, government monopolies, government procurement, up-to-date competition law, and even visas for Singaporeans planning to work in the US. So we really built on that as an element of strengthening the economic cooperation. Strategically, it was also a way for the US to engage closer with the Asia Pacific. The US then followed up with FTAs with Australia and Korea, and then came into the TPP. So even though the TPP, and many people here have seen it as a US-led initiative, the seeds for that initiative were actually first planted across the Pacific. There was this idea, APEC, initially in the 1990s, that we wanted to achieve a broader and freer Asia-Pacific in terms of trade for the whole region. We still have this term, this trade utopia that we're all trying to achieve called the FTAAP, Free Trade Area of the Asia-Pacific, which will mean to connect all sides of the Pacific together. It will comprise all 21 APEC economies eventually. Looking back at that time, as we started building on the US-Singapore FTA, the next thing we worked on was the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership. 4 small countries, what maybe you may be familiar with is called the P4. It was 4 small countries, first Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand, and then Brunei in 2005. And we did a P4 agreement that entered into force in 2006. So as we built on the US-Singapore FTA and our other FTAs, we have FTAs with Australia and New Zealand and other countries, we then pulled across into this P4. At that time, 2006, smaller countries that connected the Pacific. But that was really the vision. How do you connect the Pacific between the Asian side and the American side of it? For Singapore, that P4 agreement was quite important because it was a potential pathfinder for this nirvana of this free trade agreement with the Asia Pacific. The vision was to grow it and to bring in larger countries. And that's when we started a very active program of reaching out to the United States to bring them in. The US joined the P4 in 2008. President George W. Bush saw it as an opportunity for US businesses and to grow regionalism and build up US commercial presence across the Pacific. President Barack Obama then took it on and made the TPP, the P4 renamed, as the centerpiece of his Asia strategy. And it also gave the US a platform to advance its interests and deepen its engagement with the region. After the US came in, that then attracted other partners, Australia, Peru, Vietnam in 2009, Malaysia in 2010, Mexico and Canada in 2012, and finally Japan, the sort of crown jewel in this, came in 2013. As you all know, we concluded the TPP in October 2015 and signed it in February 2016. It brought together 40% of global GDP. And then 2016 happened, and trade became a very difficult topic to discuss in the United States. The new administration, when it took office, one of the first things they did was withdraw from the TPP. This was, of course, a disappointment for all the TPP countries. The balance of benefits in the TPP had changed, and this caused a recalculation. Is it worth it for us to continue with the TPP 11? And at that time, the 11 countries felt that it was. For Singapore, we're a steadfast proponent of free trade and regional economic integration because it means good jobs at home for us. We worry about jobs in Singapore as well and opportunities for Singapore businesses. And it also became our ambition at that time to maintain the integrity of the TPP. It was a guiding principle that we wanted to ensure that the market access commitments will continue and there were minimal changes to those rules. So when the 11 countries met first in Chile in March 2017, we decided to keep that TPP alive. And we looked at how quickly can we move this in order to retain this whole package of the TPP? And out of that emerged the CPTPP. The CPTPP is a standalone agreement which incorporates the original TPP text by reference. So it retains that original agreement, market access, high standards, and will continue towards this goal of regional integration. It is a smaller agreement without the US. It's 15% of global GDP. With the US, TPP would have been 40% of global GDP. But 15% of global GDP is not bad. The EU is slightly more, about 16, 17%. So I think we're sort of on par to where it is. The key difference between the TPP and the CPTPP was that some provisions had to be suspended temporarily and will not take effect under the CPTPP. For Singapore, we still continue to benefit under the new agreement. Our companies will gain from the tariff elimination and remove the non-tariff barriers, and it reflects to better the way that business is done today, with global supply chains and movement of e-commerce around. So we look forward to tomorrow's signing, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Aikawa.
Thank you. The remarks by Ambassador from Singapore reminded me of the fact that Singapore is the first country that Japan has reached a bilateral FTA or EPA, economic partnership agreement. Japan came into this regional integration business as a very latecomer. We've been sort of sticking to the GATT or WTO for a long time, but sort of forming an FTA with Singapore is a kind of a transformational change on our part when it comes to international economic policy making. As was sort of repeatedly said, that tomorrow marks a special day for those ministers and negotiators of 11 members of TPP negotiation. It was not an easy path to come to where we are now, so that we have ample reason to celebrate this signing event, hopefully with great Chilean wine. And a comprehensive progressive agreement of TransPacific partnership. Well, this is, if there is anything to be desired in this agreement, this acronym CPTPP is one of them. So hard to pronounce. So allow me to stick with TPP 11 instead of CPTPP. In January last year, when the United States announced its withdrawal from TPP, TPP 12 to be exact, as moderator said in the beginning, that who would have thought that we have achieved what we have achieved today within such a short length of time without the participation of the United States. The timing of the US withdrawal announcement was particularly inopportune for us, as the Japanese government had obtained ratification approval from the Diet just a month prior to the announcement. Diet deliberations for ratification were very, very difficult and arduous. There are people in Japan who feel, of course, like other countries, who feel threatened by the changes that the TPP 12 might bring. So after the US withdrawal, there are many people saying, I told you so. Some people argue that we should give up TPP and shift our resources to other regional integration undertakings such as RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. In the end, it was Prime Minister Abe's call or decision to hold our ground and stick with TPP, and the rest is history. What are considerations behind this decision? Let me try my own personal observations. When the Trans-Pacific regions are really at a fork in the road, with transformative changes occurring, such as the rapid rise of China. In terms of regional architecture, what we decide today would have a tremendous significant overarching implications for the rest in shaping the contour of the Asia-Pacific region in the rest of the century. So TPP is an agreement, as was explained by the ambassador, that was going far beyond the FTA within the meaning of Article 24 of the GATT or WTO, the elimination of tariffs and trade barriers. It encompasses making of the rules and disciplines of investment, such as a ban on technology transfer requirement for overseas investment, and those disciplines and rules of the activities of state-owned enterprises, such as a ban on business distorting use of non-commercial activities. Securing an open, free, cross-border e-commerce environment is another example. So the labor standards, environmental standards, intellectual standards. So in essence, TPP, whether in the form of TPP 12 or 11, provides new rules and standards for global trading and cross-border economic activities in the 21st century. And I might add that TPP 11 partners all are free market-driven, the rule-based economies with a total GDP of $10 trillion and population of 500 million people. So in the same vein that TPP is expected to provide a potential template for to other ongoing regional integration initiatives such as RCEP that I explained and FTAP. I might note that a number of elements of TPP are reflected in the recently concluded Japan, EU, European Union, EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement. And of course, we have a domestic economic imperative to promote TPP. As you know, that Japanese economy has struggled with this deflationary cycle for the last 20 years, and we are faced with fundamental challenges such as how to keep the economic machine rev up with a declining population. So through making the most of the expanding markets in the region and generating growth and innovation, TPP would help us better deal with those challenges. And that is why the Abe government puts TPP as one of the main pillars of his what is called third arrow of Abenomics. First one is fiscal stimulus, second one is monetary easing, and this is third one is structural reform, and TPP is an essential ingredient of this structural reform. So with those considerations in mind, we began, well, after the withdrawal announcement by the United States, we began to reach out to other countries, explaining why TPP still remain relevant even without the United States participation. So through those interactions, there was emerging consensus that we should give a try to TPP 11. In the process, Japan played a role, sometimes as intermediary, sometimes as facilitator, sometimes as bridge builders, and oftentimes as venue providers. One of 3 out of 4 meetings among chief negotiators took place in Japan, actually. But negotiating processes themselves are arduous and sometimes even torturous. And we have been through ups and downs. TPP is like house of blocks, and each block representing the outcome of lengthy quid pro quo pro concession negotiations. So just in the block of a house of TPP 12 to a house of a TPP 11 is I have to say a painstaking exercise. In a way, it is understandable that the countries were tempted to take out blocks of concessions that they provided to the United States once the United States was no longer a member. But if you take too many blocks, the House might collapse. So the task before us was to make the House flexible enough to keep 11 members on board, but at the same time make it durable enough to withstand the turbulences of 21st century. So after the lengthy negotiations, we agreed on the structure of TPP, keeping almost all the elements of TPP-12 intact, with the suspension of the 1222 sort of provisions, which could serve as a sort of a hanging fruits. I don't know whether it's high or low, but hanging fruits for the United States if they want to, if they decide to join the TPP family at some point in the future. With that structure, we do believe that TPP is as progressive and comprehensive enough to take on the challenges of the 21st century. And also at this point in time that it's worth mentioning that TPP-11, we agreed to keep each country's tariff concessions schedules, so expanded market access, as we agreed in TPP-12. That means that the same level of market access will be provided to TPP-11 countries. And as the largest economy among TPP partners, Japan's contribution to that effect is I think, considerable. So where do we go from here? Obviously, we need to focus our efforts in our respective ratification process. For TPP to take effect, we need a ratification of 6 parties, and I can assure you Japan will take the lead in the ratification process, as we did in TPP-12. TPP is designed to be an open architecture agreement. This is one of the very characteristics that make the TPP special. The door is open for non-TPP countries who are interested in joining. So we are willing to interact with and engage in dialogue with those interested parties. We're happy to share whatever information relating to TPP-11 with other countries interested in joining. But last but not least, the TPP is a landmark achievement in many respects, but it is not meant to replace the existing free and open international order that has supported the prosperity and stability for more than 70 years after the war. TPP is meant to strengthen and reinforce those structure commensurate with need of the 21st century. And I believe that TPP-11 partners are on the same page for that. So with that, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Hillman.
Thank you very much. So colleagues have already spoken a bit about how the TPP came about, how the TPP had successive countries, including Canada and Mexico and Japan, enter into the discussions over time, the conclusion of the TPP, and then our road to CPTPP and the structure of that agreement. So I don't think I'm going to spend time reiterating any of that. I think what I would like to do maybe is to focus on what I think the benefits are for the agreement, for the parties, and specifically where we see the benefits for Canada in particular. You know, at their core, trade agreements do 2 things. They open markets. There are instruments whereby countries get together and they decide that they are going to provide each other with the mutual benefits and preferences in order to enhance and in order to encourage trade, investment, supply chains between them or amongst them in a regional agreement. And the second thing that they do is they establish transparent, predictable rules that set an environment for countries or businesses to be able to feel confident that they know the framework under which they are going to be operating within that block of countries, so that they're encouraged to take advantage of those market access openings that have been provided through the agreement. And the CPTPP does both of those things, and is designed to serve as an integrator among the countries that are part of the agreement. And as has been said, it's an agreement that is designed to grow. And so as it does, to increase this partnership and this regional bloc. So for starting, so I'll take maybe those 2, using that framework, take those 2 aspects one at a time. On the market access side, for Canada, let me speak first and say the CPTPP is a very important instrument for Canada to expand its presence and help diversify our trade into the Asia-Pacific region. Before this agreement, we had one FTA in Asia with South Korea, and so the CPTPP provides us with access, preferences, and a stable trading environment with a number of very important and key partners in Asia. And it also allows us to modernize and deepen our relationship with the 3 countries within the bloc that we already have FTAs with our Mexico and Chile and Peru. Those are all very foundational and important FTAs for our country, but, you know, as always, these things can be modernized, improved, and deepened. So it serves that dual purpose for us. Specifically, and let me get a little bit specific here, because I do think that this is really important to demonstrate the ambition as we in trade circles talk about these agreements, the ambition of the CPTPP. For us, for Canada, and for all the TPP countries, there are widespread and deep tariff cuts and eliminations across all sectors. There is the reduction of important trade barriers across all sectors. And there is an expansion of market access opening, as has already been discussed, in services and in investment. For example, in areas such as agriculture, which is important to all of our economies to a greater or lesser extent, but certainly very important to ours. We are going to benefit from tariff elimination in some of our most widely traded commodities, beef, pork, canola, wheat, barley. In our fish and seafood, full tariff elimination, most of it upon entry into force of the agreement. In our forestry and wood products, again, full tariff elimination, some immediately, some over time. These are major commodities and major products within our economy that we trade in. So it's a very, very good news story for Canadian traders. But as I say, it's not just goods. So as with every economy, ours is moving more and more towards the services sector. And in that regard, we have partners in the CPTPP that have all provided additional market access to what they have offered under the WTO Agreement on Services, and some of them much greater access than they've ever offered in any FTA. So this is, again, looking to the modern economy, where we're going as countries, looking to the future. These are really good signs of our ability to work together and to integrate in these sectors. And I guess the last thing I would say on the market access element is this is an agreement that was specifically designed to grow. It's specifically designed to attract new countries into its fold. And so in that respect, the standards that we set in terms of market access, and of course the rules that we set, are really the gift that will keep on giving as countries come forward and express their interest in joining us in this trade agreement. So I said at the outset, the second thing that trade agreements do is that they establish, predictable, transparent, reliable rules. And in this regard, I would say, in having worked in the area of trade negotiations for almost my whole career, one of the things that is obvious to me is that governments are really, it's very difficult for governments to keep up with the pace of change in the private sector. And that becomes much more difficult when we are trying to work in concert as groups of governments to keep up with the change of pace of the way business is done in the private sector. And what the CPTPP sought to do, and I think succeeded in doing, was to recognize that the world of business has changed since all of us signed up to the WTO agreement and many of us entered into bilateral free trade agreements with each other, and to make accommodations for that, set rules for the way in which business is operating today and the way in which it's going to continue to operate. And so you will see that the rules around regulation making, the rules around investment, the rules around transparency, the operation of state-owned enterprises in our economies are all, in addition to, of course, the services sector, the e-commerce sector, digital commerce, they're all designed to set a platform that is enabling businesses to integrate and work together in the economy that we have today, and hopefully help in the economy that we're moving towards. I think also, and this is very important for all of us, the CPTPP is designed to reflect the values that we have as a group of countries. And in that respect, we have a chapter on small and medium-sized enterprises. As has been mentioned, we have strong and enforceable chapters on labor and environment. Shioko mentioned in her opening remarks that we are at a difficult time in the international discourse around trade, where we do find that there are many citizens in all of our countries who feel that the benefits of international trade and globalization just haven't, that the promise of international trade and globalization just hasn't been lived up to in their segment of the economy or their part of our country. And that's something that our government takes, very seriously, and all of the governments around the CPTPP table were very cognizant of, is that we not only have to do good things to enhance the prosperity of our citizens and to allow for economic growth of our countries, but we have to demonstrate that we're doing it. We have to make sure that we communicate that as well. And so those two objectives were very much kept to heart in the negotiation of the TPP, but also very importantly in the reconsideration and the discussions that happened towards the CPTPP. From Canada's perspective, we have, our government has established an agenda which we call the Progressive Trade Agenda, which is an agenda designed specifically to address the concerns that our citizens have around the lack of inclusiveness potentially in some of the agreements that have been negotiated or in the agreements that we're working to negotiate. And so in that respect, I think that it's incredibly positive that the CPTPP has reaffirmed the importance of, in addition to small businesses, the environment chapter, the labor chapter, corporate social responsibility, and cultural identity and diversity, indigenous matters and rights, inclusiveness, the government's right to regulate. There are many, many examples. But these are all designed to be sure that our citizens understand that we are hearing what they say. So both on the economic market opening side, the development of strong and stable rules in regulatory matters, in trade facilitation, and on the responding to the call that we have of our populations to say, well, please make sure that this takes account of my reality. I think it's fair to say that the CPTPP has set a very high standard for trade agreements in the region and in the world, potentially, hopefully. So we're looking forward to tomorrow, and we're looking forward to the next steps of bringing the agreement into force and to continuing to shape the rules in the region for the benefit of all of our countries. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let's try it.
Well, thank you, Shihoko. Thank you, Shihoko. And thank you as well to our speakers. Before beginning my remarks, I wanted to offer Ambassador Pareja's apologies. He had hoped to join you today at this interesting discussion, but was summoned out of the country for work purposes. I have the benefit and the great challenge of following three great speakers and who have spoken so eloquently about the motivations and past history that led to the CPTPP. I'm sorry, I as well have a little bit of difficulty with adding the C and the P to those original three letters, but and as well as the great commentary that we've received on the comprehensive nature of this agreement and just how transcendent it is in terms of its objectives and its coverage. So maybe what I would like to do is focus, I've been asked to focus on offering a little bit the perspective of some of the smaller markets that compose that integrate the TPP, and speaking a little bit to about the strength of the diversity of the membership of the TPP. In the TPP, you have countries as large as Japan, as has been mentioned, with its significant economic clout, Canada, advanced economies like Canada, Singapore, the ones mentioned. But you also have a group of, let's say, smaller pieces of the pie, but that together do add up to a larger chunk of the pie. And in our case, Peru, and speaking a little bit as well for some of the other countries, Chile, Brunei, Malaysia, we are more smaller size markets, but I think share one distinguishing feature as well as with the larger economies, which is being part of this dynamic region in Asia Pacific that is high growth. And so these smaller markets are actually at a stage of their development where the TPP 11, CPTPP, and actually the original TPP made much sense. And part of that reason is because our focus is always, as Deputy Ambassador Hillman mentioned, on the benefits for the citizens and for the economic operators, for the businesses, the small and medium enterprises, anyone that can benefit along the chain. And obviously, one of the main objectives of the TPP for us was being able to insert ourselves in these global supply chains at what is becoming, or what is already actually in the 21st century, the center of global growth, which is the Asia Pacific. And as Ambassador Mirpuri mentioned, this complements a number of other initiatives which are neither mutually exclusive or compete with this initiative, such as APEC, such as some of the other agreements mentioned. In our case, I've been asked to talk a little bit about the Pacific Alliance, which is pragmatic, fast-paced initiative, integration initiative in Latin America. We're composed of Mexico, Peru, Chile, and Colombia. So 3 out of 4 Pacific Alliance members are in the TPP. And the TPP is a key piece of the Pacific Alliance's approach to the Asia Pacific, which is to be able to join these global supply chains, these value-added chains. And that was really one of the main objectives of the TPP itself. It was to draw upon the strengths of the different economies. Each of our economies has something really to offer. We all have different sectors, and we were able to arrive at this balanced, beneficial package. That's an important idea to keep always in mind, that in order for TPP to be sold, I think it was Ambassador Mirpuri that mentioned it a few years back, I've had the benefit of listening to his great conversations for several years now, since this is a story that has several years. And one of the key messages was always that it has to be beneficial for everyone. Agreements that are beneficial skewed towards one side, they're not really able to be sold back home, because you do have, in the end, to sell these agreements. And that's one of the strengths of the CPTPP, is that we've been able to take this package that already had been agreed to, as Ambassador Mirpuri mentioned, that the balance shifted somewhat with the decision announced by the United States, and to repackage it somehow, maintaining, as ministers recognized in Da Nang, its high standards, overall balance, the integrity, and its firm commitment to open markets and to advance regional economic integration. For us, this is part of the formula that we've pursued. Now, speaking a little bit to the benefits of this agreement for such smaller markets as Peru, maybe to give a few examples. As I mentioned, we are a smaller economy, 31.5 million people, but have been fast growth, averaging 6% a year. And this has tangible benefits, lifting significant numbers of people out of poverty, bringing them into this bullish middle class. And to continue along that path, one of the key components was really the streamlining of regulations, the cooperation mechanisms between technical agencies that are there in the TPP and now in the CPTPP. And this allows us to continue this work. In the Pacific Alliance, we already have this very much institutionalized as well through technical working groups that have been able to advance in harmonizing regulations. And in the case of the TPP, this will only complement and add to that dynamic, I believe, so that we are able to insert ourselves in these global supply chains. Obviously, the presence of some of the larger economies, in this case Japan, and the very significant market opening that was achieved in the TPP for all of our countries, each one gave something, does mean that there are very tangible benefits. In the case of Peru, we have a value-added sector very focused on agriculture, fisheries. We are a commodities economy, but we do make that differentiation between those commodities that their production contributes to full employment, as is the case in Peru, and that adds value along this global supply chain. So the opening of a number of markets under the TPP, as I mentioned, the liberalization and market access with Japan, with Canada, is important. For us, TPP is also part of a broader political and economic strategy of approximating to the Far East Asia region of the world that has been growing, and ASEAN and in Southeast Asia that has been growing very quickly, and that offers a very important market opportunity for us. So we're talking about 4 new Asian markets in the case of Peru through TPP: New Zealand, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Australia was originally to be a new market as well, achieved through the TPP, but we've recently signed an FTA with them that is also coming into line, and that really was one of the results of the TPP, since we were able to do like an early harvest of the benefits and the negotiations achieved there. So it's going to be beneficial for our agro industry and fisheries. It's a new market of about $368 billion in products that these 4 countries import that we believe we can supply. And there are strategic benefits. As I mentioned, our countries, in the case of the Pacific Alliance, have really been reaching out. One of the key tenets of the Pacific Alliance is to become a platform towards the Asia Pacific, because it is seen as the center of global growth. And in our cases, we are the economies that have been fast-paced in market opening, in streamlining regulations, so we see a lot of complementarity there. And because of that, I think that has been one of the main reasons why precisely we've chosen as well to advance negotiations in the context of the Pacific Alliance with new associate states, candidate associate states. And among them, I'm happy to say, we have Canada, and Singapore, as well as New Zealand and Australia, with which we are already negotiating. We just had the second round of negotiations between the Pacific Alliance and each of these countries. And so it's part of this formula. Maybe to speak a little bit as well to the future, how we see the future of CPTPP. As I mentioned, as has already been mentioned by the other speakers, the balance has been maintained, and so we expect moving forward that can only grow with the addition of new member countries to the agreement. First, of course, we have to get it into line, but if you take a look at the accession clause in the CPTPP, it does maintain the original spirit of the agreement, which was to be completely open to new states and separate custom territories, to new economies, really, that could find advantage in joining it. And obviously, we know that there are a number of countries already interested. First, as mentioned, we have to bring the agreement into line, for which we need the 6 ratifications. But we do expect that as new countries join the agreement, and obviously there are a number of natural candidates, which are countries that had previously expressed agreement in TPP, but because we were so focused on getting it done, there was this moment where we were first considering, let's get TPP done, then we can move on to new countries. Well, with the entry into force of CPTPP and with the flexibility of that accession clause, we believe that this will only draw more countries into it. Exclusions have been mentioned, but I think it's worth it's worth reiterating, maybe some of the other speakers already did this, that the CPTPP has maintained the vast majority, to a great degree, the integrity of TPP, and that means that this continues to be one of the most comprehensive agreements that we've ever achieved, really. As I was mentioning, in the case of our FTA with, EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan, our bilateral agreement covered maybe 88% of our tariff fines that were to be benefited, whereas through TPP, in the case of Peru, we've actually managed to achieve 98% coverage. And this is also part of the tendency in the world that we always have to keep in mind. Trade agreements, the complexity of these negotiations, covering things as diverse as rules of origin, as very relevant for supply chain, investment rules, services. They are sanitary and phytosanitary, among other standards. They're always meant to build towards the larger goal of facilitating trade, of accelerating trade. And that actually means that in the context of the WTO, of these regional trade agreements, you can only move towards a greater level of ambition. You can only really move, you only negotiate upwards. You don't negotiate downwards. And that's an important idea to keep in mind, because that has been the practice really for the last 70 years in the international trade system. So it's not up to us to really speculate as to a certain country and whether they, might be able to approach again the TPP. I'm trying to be diplomatic. We all know which country I'm talking about. But there's always in the press these suggestions that you can move backwards. And I would find that very difficult, because it would be a challenge for our own countries to sell back home. You negotiated this great agreement, this high standard. It was a very difficult negotiation. People forget that this was an 8-year really negotiation. So we have to keep that in mind. We, of course, as our trade minister has said, would welcome the return of the United States. The United States is very welcome to TPP. I have to remind that according to the accession clause in CPTPP, that can happen subject to the terms and conditions that could be agreed between the parties, but that can happen. And I think we have to remember that it was always the intention for the TPP to be a 12-party agreement. So you certainly have, at least on the side of Peru and some of the other members, I'm sure it's shared by all the members, that willingness. But we do have to keep in mind that the objective is to advance trade integration and to benefit our consumers through a greater levels of ambition, and not the other way around. We do, as mentioned by Canada, we have our own concerns regarding the integration of those that may feel left behind by trade, but we believe the way to do that is to continue moving forward and to find other avenues to care for these sectors and to offer opportunities. Really, the best way, as mentioned by my trade minister, is to continue to insert them in the global supply chains and to continue to improve their welfare. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all very much for your very rich analysis of where we are and where we're heading. I think there's a general consensus that the strength of CPTPP is the open framework, that it is open to new membership. And indeed, the success of it is whether it can continue to attract new members to join. Alvaro mentioned in passing that we're not going to talk, we need to be diplomatic about where the United States may or may not stand on this. But I wanted to turn to another country that has already expressed interest, and that is China. And China was, of course, not part of the TPP 12 member countries, but it had expressed interest. It had actually turned from seeing it as a part of a containment policy of the United States and its allies to keep China out of the Asia Pacific, to something that it could actually turn to spearhead its own structural reform and encourage change from within. There are, however, concerns about Chinese trade practices, not least its subsidies and forced technological transfers. And I want to particularly highlight that because at the end of last year, at the WTO, the United States, as well as Japan and the European Union, actually were united in expressing their objections towards these unfair trade practices, which was really geared towards China without mentioning China by name. So my question to all of you is, can China be a source of unity for the 11 member countries, or will it be a source of friction within the TPP 11?
Okay, I'll go first because China is an important part of the entire regional economic architecture. If they can come up to the standards of the TPP 11, then they should be welcome to join. Let's not create new conditions for them. The conditions in TPP 11 are difficult enough for any member. No, it's not just China. There are other countries in the region that also are looking at the agreement as potentially coming in. That, as Alberto said, we've built on ambition after ambition, which means it is becoming hard for new members to come in, and they will have to make a lot of adjustment in order to reach the standards that we've achieved. Because China is such a fundamental part of the economic architecture of the region, then I can see why they see a need to get into the conversation about this. There are other agreements taking place in the region. We have the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is centered around ASEAN, with 6 of ASEAN's key partners, China, Japan, Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand. The standards are lower in that. It sort of evens out some of the FTAs we have with each of these countries. China is an active member of that. You have things like the Belt and Road Initiative. China's ended up being the largest trading partner of every Southeast Asian country, of most of the other countries in the Asia Pacific, including the United States, that we don't want to leave them out, but we want to make sure that when they come in, they benefit as much as the other current members of the agreement in that process. And that may be something that, we will have to have a long conversation about that when we're ready. The key now is to get CPTPP signed tomorrow, get it ratified, start a process of consolidation, and then let's look at who else wants to come in, including potentially the United States coming into this or coming back to the TPP.
Well, as Ambassador said, that TPP 11 is open to any country, so that we welcome any country who could meet the high standard of rules and disciplines stipulated in TPP 11 with enough level of transparency, so that if China will be able to meet those standards, I see no reason to exclude them. I mean, just like other countries, as Master said, that it would be very difficult for any country to meet the standards set in TPP 11, so that we treat China, if they expressed interest, equally with other countries. Having said that, the sheer size of China is presenting opportunities as well as challenges. So that as a neighboring country, Japan has been, has been through ups and downs with China, but at the same time that we have kept trying to engage China in sort of a regional architecture as well as a multilateral architecture. So in any way that the TPP 11 is not meant to contain China, it's impossible. But at the same time that we, of course, we set we know that the TPP 11 set the high standards, and that's if those those provisions would induce China to to meet those standards, that should be welcome. And Japan, for one, has been engaged with China in regional integration agreements such as RCEP. In RCEP, China is a member. And we have also engaged in negotiations on or discussions on trilateral free trade agreement, China, Republic of Korea, Japan, so that China is, is an economy of great size, and China is presenting a unique challenges to any one of us.
We have about 20 minutes, and I see a couple of hands. Why don't we take 2 questions at a time? If you could wait, we are live webcasting this, so if you could wait for a microphone to come and identify yourself and keep your questions a question. Thank you. The gentleman in the back with the glasses, and then the gentleman here with the glasses. I'm sorry, both on the edge here.
Stanley Roth, no affiliation. Just to follow up on the last
Sorry.
question, really, I'm having a hard time understanding what's in it for China with TPP 11. I understood with TPP 12, not just given the size of GDP, but all the standards that was set and the strategic importance why China might have been interested. Now we won't know, at least unless the U.S. comes back in. But given what China's doing with RCEP, which, as Ambassador Mapuri says, has lower standards and doesn't have the U.S. in, given the enormous BRI, I saw one estimate, I don't understand how that came to it, but $8 trillion worth of Chinese investment in 70 plus countries. I mean, leave aside what constitutes a project in BRI. What is in it for China to come into the higher standards of TPP 11?
And then the gentleman here. No. No. Yes. Sorry. He had glasses too. I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm a student. My name's Joshua Brown, and maybe this is just my naiveness as a youth speaking, but I was wondering, why does there seem like there is such an elitism or like a disregard for regular people and popular concern in these trade agreements? So, for example, large unions in America came out against TPP, like AFSCME, large environmental groups like the Sierra Club, Doctors Without Borders even came out against it because the intellectual property rights would jack up prices for life-saving medicines for people in the developing world. And even in Peru, as I'm sure Mr. Hart knows, there was that trade agreement in 2009 that led to really bad environmental regulations where people turned out in the thousands to protest, and then the government brutally suppressed those protests by firing on people. So why does it seem like there's this disregard for regular people while business and like profit and cutting regulations is put on a pedestal?
Great. Who would like to go first?
Well,
Shall we
maybe
do-
I'll
Yeah.
take a crack at it. I'll leave your last question to the last and start maybe with the question on maybe a comment on China first. There's been a lot of talk, for example, about every time in any event, in any of these events, China comes up. It comes up everywhere. It has to do with its particular moment in history. I mean, China, no one doubts, is rising in terms of its economic clout, and it does have this reach. As Ambassador Mapuri mentioned, it is the main, it's one of the main or the main trading partner for many of the Asia-Pacific economies, and that includes Peru. China actually surpassed the United States as Peru's main trading partner for a few years back. But then you have to always consider that not all trade is the same. For example, with China, Peru has mainly commodities trade, primary trade. It is a major opportunity for value added, for generating employment. But there is always this view, especially in your productive sectors, especially for smaller countries, really, that opening up to China can be a threat to your domestic productive structures. And yet, we, for example, we negotiated an FTA with the United States, and then we negotiated one with China, and we opened up, including in sectors such as textiles, where clearly China was going to be a factor. Trade negotiations, they're not zero sum. You know, you care for your sectors. And drawing on a comment that you made, what kind of representation are there for these concerns, environmental, labor? I think if you look at the TPP agreement, it did strike a very ambitious and good balance in terms of those type of clauses. There is significant coverage, both in terms of labor standards, environment standards, and really it's because, as Ambassador Mirpuri mentioned, this is built on previous negotiations. In 2009, when our FTA with the United States came into force, it included, it was the result of the famous May 10th agreements, where the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress were able to come up with a package of what should be the forward-thinking new standards, right? Those are already incorporated in the case of Peru into our FTA. The TPP has basically taken those, and where some difficulties may have been found in implementing them before, it's tried to reinforce the cooperation in that area. That's just to give one example. We're 11 countries, plus the United States in the original TPP, let's say 12. So you have many of those interactions. You have many side agreements. You have a lot of bilateral cooperation agreements. So there's a lot of investment, both in terms of resources, institutional time, which is really, in my opinion, even more expensive than institutional financial resources, because it requires a lot of dedication to get these agreements going. So certainly, at least in our case, definitely, those concerns that you're mentioning, they definitely are a part of the negotiations and of the talks. You mentioned some areas, but for example, Peru, we were one of the countries that promoted, and we're happy that it's there, a development chapter within the TPP. There's also an SME chapter, which is the whole purpose of the negotiation of the TPP was to have as a strong protagonist the small and medium enterprises, in our case it's micro, small, and medium enterprises. The businesses that really don't always have clarity in terms of how they can insert themselves into global supply chains and how they can take advantage of those agreements, those were really at the focus of these agreements. So when some of these accusations are made, they're very valid, because civil society, which by the way had a seat always at all of the negotiating rounds. I mean, I think this must have been one of the negotiations where we saw most NGOs out of any trade negotiations ever carried out. I certainly remember seeing them everywhere, so I'm certain that they were there. And that was very positive, because we had that dialogue. Their concerns were certainly incorporated into the agreement. So this is part of that selling point of the CPTPP, TPP 11, as a 21st century forward-thinking, open, and what was the other clause? And evolving, progressive agreement, evolving. So they very much are there. Maybe that answers it to a certain degree.
Maybe just to add, I think there's not that much more to add, but I think what I would like to add to that is there is no way in which the countries sitting around the table in the TPP negotiations, and then as we move towards the CPTPP, disregarded the concerns of their citizens. That is the opposite of what the governments did in these discussions. What we sought to do, all of us, was to have conversations with every segment of our society to try and understand how we, going back to my comments, governments are not perfect in setting out arrangements and rules that meet the needs of everybody. But we start these processes with objectives, and our objectives are to enhance the ability of our citizens to prosper. So, and to protect and protect our ability to regulate in the public interest, and at the same time to set the conditions that will allow for maximum opportunity for as many people as we can within our societies. And that's a complicated mix of things to do for one country. When you put all of the countries together, it becomes even more complicated. But there's no way in which this was not at the front of mind of all of the countries involved. For our part, the TransPacific Partnership was concluded right when our government changed from one government to the next. And when the Prime Minister Trudeau's government came in, our minister engaged in hundreds and hundreds of meetings of public consultations around the agreement and what it meant for Canadians. And it was a lot of those ideas that were brought forward in the discussions with partners in the CPTPP to enhance and underline and reinforce the values and to make sure that we'd gotten it right. And, you know, these are not, as I say, it's not necessarily perfect. It's an evolving process, but everybody is conscious of the fact that there is a sense that, and there's legitimate reasons for this sense that, as I say, the promise of international trade, globalization, and the way in which our economies are evolving hasn't been as beneficial for everybody across society.
Can I say, because I don't want to duck this question, because it's a very important question about, you know, what does this mean for the man in the street? Governments do not negotiate agreements for MNCs or the big corporations. We do it because it is important for our people. You take a country like Singapore, small economy, small geography, trade is 3.5 times our GDP. We have to be connected to the world. We need to be connected to the world because it's important for our people. There are adjustments to be made. Our unions don't like the fact that we connect to the world, but there are no options. When you have to import everything into Singapore and many other countries, you have to make adjustments. In the adjustments, there are difficult adjustments for some people. But you are creating a framework that is better for the future. We are talking about new technologies. When I spoke about the US-Singapore FTA, concluded in 2004, this was before the iPhone entered our pockets. 14 years later, we all have, the world of technology has changed. Do I want to keep myself into that pre-technological evolution world and say, you know, I can't adjust because it's going to be too many difficult things, or create conditions that help our people to adjust into a new future? It is difficult. I'm not denying it. So then you've got to work around how do you make adjustments for some of the older workers who may not have it easy in this new economy. But then do you prevent their children and grandchildren having a better future? So when I've heard the objections here of labor groups and environmental groups to the TPP, and then when I spoke to the other TPP countries, for them this was a new protectionism. What you see as high labor standards and high environmental standards for countries coming up the levels is you are just making it too hard for us to enter into these global supply chains. You want to protect your markets. And so there are two perspectives on this. And it's not just a perspective here of your labor unions and environmental groups that were pushing a particular agenda. There's also, what do unions in Vietnam say about this? What do the environmental groups in Vietnam say about these things? Because they wanted to join this. They don't want to pollute their environment. They have seen the lessons of development. They want to move forward as well. Their labor groups don't want to. I think it's an important, we haven't quite addressed that publicly because it was always seen that we're consulting with MNCs, but there were consultations with civil society. Yeah, just remember, governments don't do these things for small groups. We do it for a mass population.
But I think that challenge is going to be even more difficult to address as we face this fourth industrial revolution and technological change and AI and automation, which is really transferring how we grow as economies. We could probably go on at length about this, but in the interest of time, I'd like to take a couple more questions. Yes, you. And then the lady in the middle as well. The lady with, yeah.
Steve Kaplan. I'm a professor at George Washington University and a current fellow here at the Wilson Center. This question actually follows up the discussion we're having currently. Would I be interested in hearing, we've heard reference to a progressive trade agenda, to adjustments, but perhaps more specifically, if you could talk about the kind of policy measures that you've included either within or outside the agreements in order to increase social responsiveness.
Hello, Leslie Delagran with the World Wildlife Fund. I have a question that follows up to some extent on the issue of environmental changes from the TPP to the TPP 11. And there's one critical change where a phrase is suspended in a key provision addressing illegal trade, which essentially guts the value of that provision. And I wonder why that was done, why the standards of the TPP 11 are lower than they are for the TPP. But then on the other side, to the extent that there are provisions in the TPP 11, marine provisions in particular, that will need to be implemented by countries, will one of the TPP 11 countries take essentially what was going to be the role of the U.S. in certifying implementation of provisions before the entry into force, so that there's some kind of overview that all countries have implemented the environmental provisions in particular before the agreement goes into force? Thank you.
Ms. Hillman, do you want to take?
Sure. So on the specific progressive elements, we have for the, I mean, we can start with, there are many different things that we can focus on. But for example, the labor chapter. The labor chapter is a strong, enforceable chapter that harkens back and reinforces and recommits to the ILO, the core ILO conventions. And it's fully enforceable through the trade agreement, which is something that is new and that goes beyond, indeed, what can happen at the ILO. This, you know, it's important not to underestimate the significance of that. I started my career doing international environmental treaty work and moved into trade later on. And the idea of taking international regimes that operate in different spheres of international regulation, whether it be environment or labor or others, and enforcing them through a trade mechanism has been very complicated conversation to have internationally for 20 years. And the TPP and the CPTPP have done that. Likewise, they have done it with the environment chapter. So I think that that in and of itself is incredibly significant. Beyond that, there is a chapter that recognizes the importance of trying to take trade agreements and bring the benefits towards small and medium-sized and micro businesses. This is a very complicated and difficult thing to do, and we struggled a lot with how do we operationalize that within our economy, because even at the national level, operationalizing that within your economy, getting the word out to small businesses, helping facilitate transaction costs at the border, these kinds of things that really matter to them are very difficult to do from a policy perspective. But what we said was, look, we could get together as a group of countries and we can try and figure these things out together, because the concerns of Canada and the concerns of Peru and are not going to necessarily be the same. Our businesses are not the same, but there are some examples and there are some experiences that we can share. So there is a proactive plan to see if it's working, to assess whether or not that is flowing down, and to come back and to talk about it and to share experiences. I think that the digital environment is going to be really interesting for us in that respect. And small businesses care a lot about the bread and butter, as we often call it, of trade agreements, which is getting your truck across the border, getting your contract set, making sure you take advantage of the tariff these kinds of things. So we need to make sure that we have the mechanisms in place to flow those benefits down. You know, anyway, there are, I can go on, but I'm a little conscious of the time, but there are many different examples that we have set, and some of them are new, and so we'll have to make sure that they're working the way we intended them to work, and so we do have mechanisms to check in to see if it's working and to create you know, adjustments if necessary. The second question was around the suspension of something in the conservation chapter, I believe. So the background to that and why that happened, I don't think is something that I'm really you know, able to speak to in detail. I think that it was decided that in ensuring that this new agreement among the parties that are now going to be party to it represented a balance that would work for every country around the table, that this was something that that had to be done. I think that's probably as much as I can really say about that.
Maybe if I can add to that. Well, first, in regard to the progressive nature, just to reiterate, this is not a declarative agreement. For many years, it was the practice of states to get together and do a declarative agreement that really had no real teeth. And all of the provisions negotiated in the agreement have had this focus mentioned by Ambassador Mipuri, Deputy Ambassador Kilman, that to be able to get benefit directly to the businesses. And as Ambassador Mipuri mentioned, we didn't mean the big corporations, but rather to operationalize the benefits for businesses. And in the case of the environment provision that was mentioned, I think it's important to reiterate the TPP does not lower at all the environmental standard of trade agreements. As mentioned, this was part of a previous package agreed upon in principle between two parties in the United States Congress, even before we ourselves took up that mantle. Having said that, it's important to emphasize that this is not a one country versus another country. You know, one country pushes environment, the other country doesn't want it. As has been mentioned, we ourselves, the different countries, each brought something to the table. In the case of Peru, we were very concerned about biodiversity. We were very concerned about fisheries. All of the countries, in the end, were concerned about the same issues as well. And the negotiations moved forward on those issues as well, and that chapter has a number of clauses, provisions, protections that hadn't been in that universe. This also flows, it's always important to remember, it flows from a larger dialogue. Trade agreements are not the only multilateral dialogue on environmental provisions and countries working together to advance the protection and conservation of the environment. There are other fora, there's CITES, there's a number of agreements. And all of our countries are very engaged in those agreements. And in the case of this particular provision, which pertains to the phrase or another applicable law, the spirit of what was meant for that provision is still maintained. The problem to a certain degree is that certain ideas can sometimes come about where you're trying to get at the same objective. And in the CPTPP, one thing that has happened is countries took a look at what was already available and how to achieve the same objective through their own legislation and through their own means. And that's recognized in the ministerial statement of Da Nang, where, in the CPTPP, in that dialogue, countries got together and they saw that agreement and said, what can we still change, and not even change because the provisions are suspended, but to achieve the same agreement. So just want to reiterate, the environmental standard is very much maintained in the CPTPP.
All right. We've gone slightly beyond our time, and we do have a second panel coming up next. But I hope you'll join me in thanking Deputy Ambassador Hillman, Minister Aikala, Mr. Hart, and Ambassador Mirpuri. Thank you very much. If you could all come back here at 3:50, that would be great. Thank you. There is coffee outside.